Welcome. I'm Governor John Rolle, and thank you for joining our Harbourside Chats. I'm joined today, first of all, with Mr. James Smith, Governor Smith, who served as governor during the 1980s and into the 1990s. And his tenure was followed by Governor Julien Francis, who was with us up until the middle of the 2000s, and Governor Wendy Craigg, who served in the role until the mid-teens. So, governors, it's a pleasure to have you all with us today. One of the things that I think comes out of this is the way we think about the central bank trying to affect the outcomes in the economy. So you look at the United States and you see the Federal Reserve, they increase interest rates, or you see the central banks get into the market and buying up lots of private debt to so-called provide more credit, or the quantitative easing, so to speak. And I know, Governor Craigg, you did a lot of work when you looked at how the central bank could transition to be able to achieve some of this outcome through quote-unquote indirect channels, almost hinting at interest rate policies and the like. But in your view, how far can we go, or what sort of aspirations should we be having in terms of the channels that the central banks use to impact the outcomes of the economy? Is the indirect channel, close or on the horizon anytime soon?
I would think so. I think that's the next horizon for the central bank, and I think you've already done a lot of work to start to prepare for that. One of the areas is certainly trying to deepen the domestic debt market, because that's the channel through which the central bank would operate in terms of buying and selling government paper. A lot of work has been done in that area in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance. And more recently, if I recall, the preparation of the repurchase arrangement, that will certainly help the central bank to be able to buy and sell, injecting liquidity into the system and removing liquidity from the system in a much more fine-tuning manner than you would do by imposing controls on the banks.
It's very interesting. Now, you each mentioned some relationship between yourselves and the Ministry of Finance in terms of the work. I think the way you started out, Governor Smith, was quite interesting because the other very hot topic in central banking is quote-unquote central bank independence. Sometimes I say it should really be interdependence, because the policy on various sides should try to work closely together. But in your view, Governor Smith, what should that relationship look like between the central bank and the Ministry of Finance, or the central bank and the Minister of Finance?
Yeah, that has to be very close. There has to be a lot of communication. And sometimes the central bank has to take the lead when, from their perch, they can see things that you don't see, within the Ministry of Finance. I'm reminded, actually, Governor Craigg was relating something recently that reminded me of something where the central bank, when I was there, had to take a non-traditional, almost a non-central bank function. There was a period of time when, as you know, the government puts out a bond issue to get in resources to carry out its capital program, in particular, build a school, build a hospital. For some other reason, a couple of the banks started being a little political, in the sense that they agreed not to participate fully in the issue. Now, from central bank, we saw that they had the resources. So it must have been some other reason why. And it was around, almost approaching an election, right? So we realized then that, the central bank took up the issue because we had the capacity to do so. And the criticism of the time was that we extend our authority, but they didn't read the act closely enough that the authority was restricted in one thing, in one form, but not in the other, right? And so we were able to do that. And I was thinking to myself, this is dangerous when you have an important sector like the banking sector, being able to decide whether or not a hospital can be built. And shortly after that, Bank of Montreal was here and they were leaving. They came to see me and they said that, we were packing up on going back to Canada. And they said one or two of the other banks are interested. Mr. Singh was here. And you may recall that I told him, hold on that. And I went to see the Minister of Finance and I said, look, I explained what happened earlier. I said, I think you're going to need a bank that you have some say in. If not, we're going to be left hopeless. If we can't do school, we can't pay social services, etc. So you need some bank you can get your hand in. At least you own a bank, and whenever the other guys try to pull something against you, you have a way of, backstopping it. And it's a role again that non-traditional for a central bank in a small economy. You find yourselves doing it. I believe you were faced recently with the banks pulling out of the family islands and leaving them. I thought of that again, and they said, wait a minute. They are licensees, so a condition of that sale in beautiful wide services, then they in this. They took fiber optic cables all the way down to Inagua, even though you only had about a couple of families there. And also, you the means you need to access to modern technology. So they made B2C. You can't just concentrate on Abaco, Nassau, and Freeport. They took it out, and they said, using the same thing. I still believe today that we should allow them to have mortar and bricks in those centers rather than mainland ATM. I would try to use the post office. Of course, we have one of those, or the government administrative office, in all of those buildings in Cabo and Little Place. You see, your pensioners, and even, and I commend you on the digital currency, etc. But, if you were an old age pensioner, no sound or something like that, you can't even get transportation to the ATM. And then you're accustomed to the mortar and bricks. Right. So there's one counter in the post office, that'll become a branch or some bank or the other. Now, I was hoping to see a bank like Bank of Bahamas. This is what I saw as the rule, to them to move in when the other banks move out. But, so my point is basically, in a small economy, one in which you have to be a little bit closer to the policy, and the Ministry of Finance may want to do some things, but you're the licensee in this sort of thing, so you find yourself having to help the wider public, the wider good, by literally using central banking as power. Remember the stock market that was sank here that they're building up because they will want to demutualize, remember? And spend a lot of money on the IT, the Irish guy who was doing it. And it never worked properly. And it was about to go under. And to this day, I believe, for us, I was here then, I think we bought 50% of the stock market, the BISX, to keep it afloat. I don't know if you still have the swing or something. They were settled in the treasury because we down. Not only the selling the person buy them back. Yeah. So again, it's where you really have to go in there to serve and to continue development of your economy.
Yeah, I was going to add that, because you're talking about the relationship between the central bank and the Ministry of Finance, that it has to be effective coordination and cooperation, because even though the policies, monetary policy, fiscal policy, they're being executed by two different agencies, they're very interdependent.
Yeah.
If the government decides to run excessive fiscal deficits, then it leaves the central bank to have to deal with it. Yeah. Okay, so but I believe that we have present in our relationship some arrangements that make it lean towards being ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the first one is when you look at the institutional arrangement, the Central Bank Act has a limit on the amount that the government can borrow. And that is so important because without that, you could have issues when it comes to deficit financing.
Sure.
Okay, so that's very important, and we have that in place. Then we also have in place the good communication, I believe, because the governor, from a high level perspective, the governor meets with the minister, I think, on a monthly basis.
Yes.
And that's something that I had instituted when I became governor, because I thought it was so important to have that dialogue with the minister, to exchange information about what's happening in the central bank, not to get approval, but so that there's an awareness, and then we can know too what is happening within the fiscal space. The other thing that we have in terms of communication and cooperation is on the technical level. There's a weekly meeting between the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, and the Treasury, just dealing with cash matters, cash planning, debt management matters, because the central bank has to be prepared to meet any requirements of the government in terms of payments. And so it needs to be able to plan ahead. So those matters are discussed on a weekly basis. What are the needs of the government, and how the central bank has to, prepare its balance sheet to respond to that. And then, of course, there's a lot of cooperation on the debt management side of it. Where,
if I may, you're making a very important point, and beyond the technical part of it, once you begin meeting with your food parts or within the Ministry of Finance or whatever, you can communicate more, right? And what happens in the public service? There are a lot of pipelines. People build their own kingdom. And we're coming from on the outside, which central bank would be an outsider. Unless you get a kind of a personal relationship with them, you can't persuade them to do anything, because they become an intruder. I think once you start the dialogue, if you get, you're not a threat to me, you're not even a public servant, really. And then you can, get your point across. Because without that, and this was from personal experience, until I got to the little bill, anything you said, I figured, I can't be right. And then, answering one to each other, into sit down and have coffee or something like that and discuss around these things, right? So I'm thinking that I first met him at Ministry of Finance, and I come to Central Bank for a meeting. I said, you're sitting there in these nice women, officers and stuff like that, trying to tell me what to do.
That's cool.
But can I just say, in response to Governor Rolle, I think that maybe one of the core questions here really is the need for independence on part of the central bank as the monetary authority. And I just would like to say that I believe that this is critical, that the Bahamas has been right to preserve this, to not infringe too heavily on that. As long as we have the Bahamian dollar, I believe it's critical that we have an agency like the central bank, which has the autonomy and the ability to protect the integrity of the dollar. And then that's the point I really wanted to make. There's one other point I'd just like to make quickly, and that is that and it goes back to maybe a comment at the very beginning, the role of the central bank of the Bahamas, and it's been said a few times, is really quite a broad one. If you look at many countries, central banks don't do all of the things that our central bank does. Most central banks are really just monetary authorities. They don't regulate the banking system. They don't become involved as heavily in the sort of broader economic policy issues as the Central Bank of the Bahamas does. The innovation of the financial or of the economy really generally often is not directly the responsibility of the central bank itself, as in our case. I think it's very important to understand that. There, I believe the Central Bank of the Bahamas goes back to my point about it being a resource, a sort of pool of talent which can tackle these different issues, which are really quite critical to the evolution of the economy. And I think that's a very important theme which explains, I would say, the real purpose of the central bank in our instance.
And good point. And before we get to a close, I just want to have one short discussion on exchange control, because I know that very diverse views on this. So one of the dimensions to the exchange controls is just managing payments for trade and goods and services. And a lot gets caught up in that and how we can make that process easier for Bahamians. The other side, which I think is the more important side, is how Bahamians interface with exchange control to make investment transactions and those types of movements. And I just wanted from each of you, what are your views in terms of how far and how fast we should be moving in terms of loosening exchange controls in that space? I want to start with you, Governor Craigg.
Well, looking back at what has happened with exchange control, it was always the perspective that we should move cautiously because we don't want to destabilize the one-to-one. And I believe that's still the case. We've gone very far in terms of removing all of the obstacles on the operational side, devolving a lot of the activity to the commercial banks, removing some of the restrictions and moving gradually with the liberalization on the capital side. I think it's something that's very difficult it's a difficult sell to a lot of Bahamians in terms of why do I need to permission to buy to invest overseas. It's a very difficult sell. But if the reason why we have the one-to-one is really it's two things to me. Well, it's the exchange controls that are preventing or are modulating the outflows, and then of course there's what I would call is a confidence factor. Because if that confidence disappears for any reason, then you really cannot control the outflows, right? And so that's really what's standing, I think, behind the one-to-one. It's not the amount of reserves that we have. It's really the confidence factor. It's the belief on behalf of Bahamians and foreign investors that the government has a solid economic policy and it won't depart from that. So I think we need to really be gradual in terms of how we liberalize on the capital account. And the steps that we've already taken in terms of allowing Bahamians to invest overseas through, I think there's a facility that we had put together years ago in terms of the broker dealers.
Yes, was it?
And increasing that, increasing those limits and monitoring that to see how it works and just tweaking that as we go along. The reduction in terms of the market, the foreign exchange market, in terms of the rates, the investment currency market, I think that's very important. Because if you can bring that down to almost nothing, right? I think Bahamians will see that as a avenue, and it's a good opportunity to make further investments. But still, complete liberalization, I don't think we're ready for that right now.
What are your views, Governor Francis?
I agree with what Governor Craigg has said. I as long as we are as linked to the United States as we are, and I think we all agree, that's not likely to change in the short term. We need to manage the one-to-one. We need to maintain the one-to-one. And, Wendy has referred to the various mechanisms we deployed in order to do that. I really believe it's as simple as that. I fully support the gradual relaxation. It's very important to understand that today, Bahamians are able to do things without any reference to the central bank, which would not have been imaginable, I would say, 20 years ago. They could go to their commercial bank, buy foreign currency for many purposes, etc. The only area which is really still under a fairly important level of control is investments. And there has been liberalization. I think that process needs to continue, but it needs to be done in such a way as to not create any very short-term, exposure on this question.
Well, I think there's another issue, because I think it's in your question, right? And it has to do with messaging and the narrative. This exchange control framework to maintain the relationship, etc. But it's also predictability. If, for instance, you're floating the exchange rate, it means, therefore, that a local business will want to buy inventory to sell in the store, say, right? He has to now think in terms of what will the dollar be worth by the time the stuff is shipped, right? And now he's got to get involved with exchange rates. The other thing, the investor coming in, or even the local guy, the build-out period, let's say maybe for 2 years for a resort. Right now, you have certainty, predictability that over the 2 years, I will be bringing in this material at this price. You're borrowing money to the materials, and you've got that predictability. So now this guy wants to invest locally or foreign, and he has to predict the exchange rates over the next 2 years, and you can lose on that.
Sure.
You go in place in water.
Yeah.
And it's for X dollars. By the time you're about to trade, it's X minus something, so you got to borrow money to bring it in. And we take that for granted. And so, even though the cost of living may be a little higher because we literally to the U.S., that's a bit of a trade-off. And I think I treat we enter the market in a very selfish way. We think only of ourselves, right? It's very much like immigration. Maybe we got too many foreigners here, but the one who works in here, okay. So, we want to give a break. And we do the same thing with exchange control. You know that if you use up all the money going to Miami shopping, then the government got to pay the banks for the money they borrowed and they'll steal it. It's not lit. We know that. But when they say this, I ain't taking anything, girl, just me. And that's, and we notice about us. And so as a central bank and trying to manage this process, you take the next and you kind of absorb it because you know you're doing the right way. You want to, over time, allow them the freedom to do things, but we can't be entirely free. A small economy like this that imports 80 to 90% of whatever it consumes, depends on a hard currency to buy our supplies and do everything else. So now, foreign currency becomes a very, very important part of the life, not of the economy, quite frankly. I used to tell them when they come complaining to me, I said, look, I can give you $1,000, Bahamian money now, send you to Miami, and you can buy a stick of gum. And I can take your money. But I can give you $1 in US and you can get the gum. That's so important the foreign exchange is.
Yeah.
I get, and I think what's important as well is when you talk about liberalization and accommodation, that you're able to generalize the treatment. And part of the process is not being ad hoc in ways that you get tied up administratively and trying to decide on the merit of individual cases. And I think that's part of the constraint. But as we draw to a close, I just want to remark that, we had two other governors, Sir William Allen, and before him, T.B. Donaldson. So they were some of the early governors in the central bank. When you think back on those two governors, do you have any fond memories about them that you'd like to share? Wendy?
Very fond memories. I had the opportunity to work with both of them. And they were they had their personas. were, they were highly regarded. They were looked at as the individuals who really established the culture of the central bank. And, they always reminded us of who we were back then and where we were in terms of the financial services sector, and that we had to govern ourselves accordingly. We are at the pinnacle of the financial services sector. Mr. Donaldson was a very personable individual. If you hear many stories about him, you would hear that he knew people by name. The bank was very small then, compared to what it is today. But he knew everyone. He knew their families. He would walk the halls of the bank and greet people. Then you had Mr. Sir William, and he was really the one that shaped the research department that I was a part of, and he was the one who really developed the view that we had a keen responsibility to inform the public about what was happening in the economy. Many of the reports that you see today are the ones that he put in place, and he always encouraged us to be our best. He, in terms of policy making, Sir William was the one who started the Monetary Policy Committee, and that exists. We all were part of that, because he saw the need for putting together a forum that could be used to consider these policy issues. It wasn't just a single individual making the decision, but it was made based on the reports that would have been prepared by the research department and considered by this committee, this high-level committee, on the way forward. And so William, I remember him fondly too for his interest in scholarship. He was keenly interested in ensuring that all of the central bank staff were well trained and had opportunities to grow. So he started the scholarship program internally, the training programs he put in place. There are a lot of us who were recipients of that. And anyone can tell you, if you were a staff member of the central bank, you were exposed to so much training.
Yeah.
So much training. The central bank really focused on ensuring that its staff, were competent in central banking. And so that's a role that he played. And then, of course, he had a strong cultural bent. And so he started the art exhibition, and he wanted to ensure that the central bank was, similar to other central banks that he had seen overseas. They sponsored the arts because they had the resources to do so. And he found this as an excellent way for the central bank to encourage the development and growth of Bahamian artists. And so that commenced the annual art exhibitions that they continue today.
Yes.
Correct. They continue to today. It's all because Sir William had that foresight, and he wanted to not just grow the bank from the responsibility of the act, but ensure that we were well developed.
Thank you. Governor Francis?
Yeah, I would say that certainly I entirely identify with all of these comments that Governor Craigg has just enumerated. For me, the most important characteristic of both Sir William and Tim Donaldson was that they, one, believed, I would say, in the integrity of the central bank, and they were committed to defending it. And I believe that at certain times during their careers as governors, they had to, defend the independence of the central bank, and they really firmly and resolutely believed in it. And then the other point I would make is that they were both, I think, very, very effective ambassadors of the central bank with the banking community. Not only the domestic banking sector, but also very much the foreign banking sector, which has always been, since the post-World War II era, has always been important in the Bahamas. Both of them were really excellent ambassadors to those two aspects of the Bahamas banking sector. And they were very much respected and loved, I would almost say, by the banking community and those who they regulated and who they oversaw. So those are the points I would like to make. I mean, again, I fully agree with what Wendy has said about their respective interests and so on. They were both very, very dear friends. I really appreciated them very, very highly. And I think the Bahamas was very fortunate to have identified them as the governors who really set the tone for the future growth and development of the central bank.
And what are your memories, Governor Smith?
No, well, I think Donaldson, the first governor, was flamboyant, and he had a personality that like a cut above. And starting a new institution, image is everything. And I think he was able to project the kind of image that central bank needed for confidence, because unless the public exceptional as, knowing what you're doing, having their interests, it's a difficult time. And Tim and those, they worked well. Plus, he was really good at forming the right alliances. In the old days, I don't know if we do it now, but governor of the central bank, the secretary of the cabinet, and financial secretary. I think they had honorary membership in institutional. So the used would go on weekends sometimes, mingle. And collectively showing that to the local expat community was very important too, because sometimes they can get out of hand because they're very wealthy people. You had Secretary of States and stuff like that living in that community. And they did this on a regular basis. Sometimes it came under criticism, but the point is, they made that connection and they were able to affect sometimes policies that might have hurt the Bahamas, because with them talking to some of those people,
Absolutely.
and they would then, something is coming down from Washington and they can stop it. Like yesterday, you're saying now, Murphy and Bill did really well. Bill had also an extra dimension. Bill's brother was the head of a very large domestic bank, Canadian owned for a very long time. And that gives you an insight, early warnings, what's happening, and which can be very useful to a regulator without roughing it. And Tony, who I knew quite well, was well respected around the table in the towing bank. And so that non-technical part of central banking, information coming to and forward, connections, and that type of thing. And the first two governors said, was a smaller country then too.
Yeah.
They really, they could tell me before it happens, and they could move to stop something from snowballing. I had a great deal of respect for them, and may they rest in peace. Have faith.
Thank you. I think it's a very high note on which to end our discussions. I want to thank you, governors, for being here, and we appreciate the perspective that you brought. I'm sure those who watch this conversation are going to learn a lot. I've learned a lot just having this discussion with you. And I also want to preview again that we are doing a documentary that is focusing on the 50th anniversary. And so also looking forward to having some individual conversation with you in the context of that documentary.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'd like to congratulate you on this initiative. I'm sure all those traders is quite.
Thank you. And just for the benefit of our viewing audience, I also want to thank you for tuning in for our Harbourside Chats. I truly hope that you enjoyed the discussions as much as we did, and that you learned something new. In our next episode, we will have some of the heads of our other Caribbean central banks present. And just for the information of governors, this year we're hosting the inter-regional central bank games, so that all of the governors are going to be present. So that's probably a first. And we will find an opportunity for you to reconnect with some of the governors. And that's at the end of March. So look forward to having them on our Harbourside chat. Thank you. Goodbye. Well, this concludes our first Harbourside chat with the governor. Thank you for joining, and please join us again for our next virtual discussion, which will feature some of the Caribbean region central bank governors who will be joining us in Nassau for the next Inter-Regional Central Bank Games. If you have questions that you would like to see me raise with my guest panelists, please send an email to harboursidechat@centralbankbahamas.com. Just remember, episodes of this series can be found on the bank's YouTube channel.